Hold on, yeah, okay, fine.
Okay. Parsha Shlach, the episode of the Meraglim, of the spies, were sent by Moshe Rabbeinu, and returned and gave a very pessimistic report to Klal Yisrael. And they led Klal Yisrael in a rebellion against Moshe, against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against God. And as a result of that, the Jewish people had to be in the Midbar 40 years. Now, there were 12 spies sent out. 10 spies gave a negative report, and 2 spies, Yehoshua and Kalev, they gave the positive report. And they were the only 2 to survive throughout the traveling in the Midbar and to ultimately go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Klal Yisrael, because they followed the approach of the spies, was that generation that rebelled against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu. So they had to die out before Klal Yisrael could enter Eretz Yisrael. And the Torah lists the names of the spies. Each was a Nasi. Each was a prince of a tribe. As Rashi tells us, and the Medrash tells us, that when they left the camp of Klal Yisrael, when they left the environment of Moshe Rabbeinu, they were righteous people. But somehow, when they came to Eretz Canaan, and they were spying out the land, their perspective changed, what we would call 180 degrees. And all kinds of pshatim are given. But in telling us the names of the spies, the Torah tells us, Ve'ela Shmosam Lamat Ruvain Shamua ben Zachor, Mat Ruvain, it's Shamua ben Zachor, Lamat Shimon Shaphat ben Chori, Lamat Yehuda Kalev ben Yefuneh, Lamate Yisachar Yigal ben Yosef, Lamate Ephraim Hoshea ben Nun. And for the tribe of Ephraim, it was Hoshea ben Nun. And the Torah tells us immediately afterwards, Eilish Mos Hanoshim Asher Shalach Moshe Lasur Saaretz. These are the names of the men that Moshe sent to spy out the land. Vayikra Moshe liYehoshua ben Nun Yehoshua. Moshe called Hoshea ben Nun Yehoshua. He gave him a new name. And all the Mefarshim are somewhat troubled. The main one is the Ramban, of course. We see the name Yehoshua is mentioned previously, all the way back when Amalek in Parshas B'Shalach, when Amalek attacks the Jewish people. So Moshe tells Yeshua, Chalon Anoshim, B'tzei Hilachem B'Amalek, choose for us men who will fight Amalek. So you see, he had the name Yehoshua, and time again, by Eldad and Medad, by time and time again, the name Yehoshua is repeated. So why does it mention over here that Moshe called Hoshea Yehoshua, as if the name change took place over here? Now, the Ramban in Parshas B'Shalach, he addresses that problem, and he suggests two answers. One answer is that one answer is that he really called him Yehoshua beforehand. But the reason earlier he called him Yehoshua because prophetically Moshe knew that Yehoshua would be among the spies, and the spies were going to rebel. And he was mispalel. He was mispalel on his behalf. Where the Chazal tell us what is the meaning of the word Yehoshua? The meaning of the word Yehoshua is that you should be, God should save you from the plan of the Meraglim, of the spies. So he added the Yud to his name to be indicative of this bracha that he should maintain his independence. From my father, and I saw in the writings of my uncle that were printed, the explanation that they gave was that the Yud represents possession. Let's say if I have a book, it's safer. But if it's free, it's my book. So Yud represents that Yehoshua should be in possession of himself, not be controlled, not be part of the group, to have that ability to separate himself from the group. The way my father explained it was to a certain degree. Yehoshua, because he was lo mashme lo shel Moshe, he did not leave the tent of Moshe. So to a certain degree, he had a personality. His personality was one of dependence, and he had to develop a personality of independence. And so, in a sense, that was the idea of him being in possession of himself. So, actually, the name was given in B'Shalach, but the reason it was given in B'Shalach was because of the situation. It was because of something that would happen in the future. At one time, I suggested a different explanation. We know, I've mentioned it many times, that every Jew has two relationships with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is a personal relationship, and there is a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception of God in the life of our ancestors. And it's very similar to this pshat, but it emphasizes a certain point. We take a look. I mentioned the three Sfarim written by Shlomo HaMelech, the three Sfarim of Tanakh, of Ksuvim, Keheles, Mishlei, and Shir HaShirim. So in Keheles, Shlomo HaMelech is identified as Keheles ben David. In Mishlei, he's identified as Mishlei ben David. But in Shir HaShirim, he's identified as Shlomo. Shir HaShirim Asher Shlomo. And Rashi already in Shir HaShirim asked that question. Why is it that in Keheles and Mishlei, he is identified as the son of his father? But in Shir HaShirim, he is identified as Shlomo. So Rashi says that sometimes that the Shema Asher Shlomo Shahashalim Shalo, in the sense it has reference to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. I want to suggest something else that actually could be read into Rashi also. We have this double relationship that a Jew has with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One, as I mentioned before, the perception of God in our own lives, the personal relationship. And then there is the relationship based on the perception of God in the life of our ancestors. And when we say our ancestors, Zavram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but our ancestors includes former generations. It includes our parents. It includes our teachers. In a sense, this was the test that the Meraglim faced was till now, when they, so long as they were in the camp of Moshe Rabbeinu, Anashim Tzadikim. The problem is the situation changed. They were now leaving Moshe. The question is, was their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based solely and limited to their association, their personal association with Moshe Rabbeinu? Or even when they were separated from Moshe Rabbeinu, they had that personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not chas v'shalom, to exclude the relationship that they had with Moshe Rabbeinu. But one relationship reinforces the other. And this was the test. We find that people, yeshiva students, when you want to evaluate the impact that an education, that a religious education, an education of Yerushalayim and Avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu and commitment to Torah, it's not enough to take a picture of the Talmud while he's in yeshiva. But see what happens when he enters a different milieu, when he moves out of town. Unfortunately, Jewish education today, and I've mentioned this many times, while it's much stronger than it was ever before in the United States, is beginning to get a certain weakness that wasn't as bad in former generations. Today, children are educated, and under ideal circumstances, that might be good. That you have to always live, it's Mishnah Pirkei Avos, in a Makom Torah, a place that the community reinforces commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But very often, situations arise which forces a person to live in a different area. Whether it's health concerns, safety concerns. Does the person have that personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And that personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reinforce the relationship that he had, in seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the life of his ancestors as well. And today, our Jewish education, it's not bad to emphasize this point, but to suggest that that is the only possibility is a prophecy, a self-defeating prophecy. Today, our education is live in this Makam Torah, live in that Makam Torah. Because if you live in another place, in a place where there aren't B'nai Torah, then your commitment will crumble. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Matter of fact, recently, without getting into the question, I read about the arguments focusing on the yeshiva boys going into the army. Not talking now about the issue of drafting yeshiva boys going into the army, but yeshiva boys going into the army. And I read statistics. I don't know how they know, but whatever it is, I'm sure the statistics probably have some truth to it, that many of those who go into the army give up observance. I have 2 points to make. One point to make is that my experience has been with some of those who gave up commitment to Torah as a result of being into the army, that far from it being the cause of their giving it up, they went into the army in order to make their commitment to rid themselves of their commitment to Torah easier, to become part of a different group. It would have happened anyway, because they were determined before they went into the army. But even with the cases where that isn't the situation, and there are some cases where people went into the army and gave up their commitment, I want to suggest that perhaps that represents a problem with our chinuch system. We talk about Mesiras Nefesh, of commitment under all circumstances. And you can't control the circumstances that a person confronts. It's not just a question of the army. It's a question of moving into other areas as well. Of course, you make connections. I mean, I'm saying, you see the Lubavitcher Shlichim, and we can't say this is 100%, but wherever they are, they're also in Crown Heights. They're able to, they created a defense system. They maintained their relationship. Even when they go into other areas that are devoid of Torah. We have to, but you could say Lubavitch has a certain unique ability in terms of being a community. It's a community that stretches around the world, wherever you are. However, even others, if we emphasize the idea of a personal relationship, now, Keheles and Mishlei, Keheles says, Sof Davar Hakol Nishma Es Halakim Yerei Ves Mitzvah Shemor. The sum total of everything in Keheles is fear of God. And Yaakov refers to God as Pachad Abi Yitzchak, the one whom my father feared. Fear of God is transmitted from father to son, from teacher to student. Mishlei ben David. So that's why it's Keheles ben David. Mishlei. Rashi says, Divrei Tochacha, Musar, ethics, chastising. We say, Shma b'ni Musar avicha. Listen to the Musar of my father, of your father. These are things, areas in life that are transmitted from parent to student, from parent to child, from teacher to student. But Shir Hashirim is the love relationship. A love relationship has to be a very personal relationship. Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shlomo. The Torah hides David. It's Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shlomo. And this is the personal relationship. And it's necessary to imbue Jewish children, and when they become adults, that's not enough to limit their relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through their Rabbi, but they have to see God in their own lives, not just in the connection that they have to their Rabbi, to their teacher. And one will reinforce the other. The Yud in Yehoshua's name is the Yud from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, Ka. Yoshiacha mi'atzas meraglim. Till now, Yehoshua, you're not always going to be together with Moshe. There'll be times you're going to be sent out on missions. And ultimately, you're going to be the leader. After Moshe Rabbeinu passes away, you have to reinforce that relationship that you had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Moshe, with your personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. My sense is, if we see a problem with people, with students of Torah, when they're forced or when they go into other environments, in terms of retaining their commitment, it's a time to evaluate our educational system. In the old days, Jewish education was on a lower level. But they knew that these people will live in areas where they're going to have a lot of contact with the outside world. They were prepared for it. In the older generation, of course, today I'm not even suggesting such a thing, chas v'shalom. Today, going to the public school system, which is overtaken by immorality, the course cannot even be considered. But this was a test I remember as a boy, the adults in the shuls that I davened, who were Americans, the overwhelming majority of them did not attend day school. There were a few day schools when they were young, but most parents did not attend. And still, many of them, of course, perhaps many more were lost. I'm not arguing about it. But today we wouldn't have that ability, even on that level, because this personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want a certain sense of total dependency. So we have to have this personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the personal relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu reinforces the relationship of, we say in Shmoneh Esrei, Elokeinu v'Elokei Abaseinu, our God and the God of our ancestors. When we have that personal relationship with God, when it's Elokeinu, then that reinforces Elokei Abaseinu, seeing God in the life of our ancestors. But if for some reason, chas v'shalom, we do not see that personal relationship, the other relationship very often also crumbles. You have to have both. Anyway, that's so the Ramban in one teretz, the first teretz, he says that Yehoshua in the time of the Milchemes Amalek, that's when he got the name. But the Torah mentions it over here because it was because of the incident of the Meraglim that Moshe knew Baruch HaKodesh that Yehoshua will encounter, that he gave him that name. I don't know, it means that he knew exactly Baruch HaKodesh, the Baruch HaKodesh let Moshe know ahead of time exactly every detail. But he knew that Yehoshua, in the future, when he becomes a leader of Klal Yisrael, a leader of Klal Yisrael has to rise above the people in order to give them direction. As Shmuel told Shaul, in Katan Beinecha, Rosh Shiftei Yisrael Ata. You have to be a leader of the people, not to be led by the people. And Moshe knew there will be occasions when Yehoshua will have to demonstrate leadership. And because of this, he gave him that name, Yehoshua. And then I think there is another, then the Ramban suggests another explanation. He says that it's true he was called Yehoshua beforehand, but that was something that Moshe Rabbeinu gave him the name. But he retained his old name, Hosea. But then Moshe Rabbeinu, by the Meraglim, he re-gave him the name that he should no longer be called Hosea, but only be called Yehoshua. I want to offer an explanation. It might be different. It might fit in with some of the explanations of the Ramban. Now, the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchos Chanukah, says that about the Ness of Chanukah, how the Greeks uh, cause problems for the Jewish people, interfere with their observance of Torah and mitzvahs, did not allow them to observe Torah and mitzvahs, took possession of their money, took their daughters, and until HaKadosh Baruch Hu had Rachmanis on them, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they had the Chashmonaim, who waged war against the Greeks, and miraculously, the band of the Chashmonaim were successful in throwing the Greeks out of Eretz Yisrael. And among the miracles that took place, the Rambam says, "V'hamidu melech min haKohanim." They appointed a king from the Kohanim. And the question is, what was so great? The Ramban, he says that that was a negative thing. Ramban in Vayechi, he says the whole house of the Chashmonaim ultimately were wiped out because they were not allowed to be kings. First of all, they were Kohanim. And according to many, there's a special prohibition in a Kohen assuming Malchus. And Malchus belonged to Yehuda. The Ramban sees the Hamidu Melech min HaKohanim as something being very negative. However, from the Rambam, it appears, when he talks about the accomplishments of the victory of the Chashmonaim, he says, "V'hamidu melech min haKohanim." So, and I saw in my uncle's name, actually, that a melech, where there's a special need, temporarily could be appointed as a king from the other Shvatim as well, even from Kohanim if that was necessary. And he said, first of all, it was necessary for them to appoint the Melech to assure that the Beis Hamikdash, because at that time there was a residue among the Jewish people of the Mishavnim, of the Hellenistic Jews, and they were trying to take control of the Beis Hamikdash and to restore the Beis Hamikdash and perpetuate the Beis Hamikdash in a state of Tahara. So it was necessary to have a Kohen who was in charge of the Beis Hamikdash to be the Melech, to be the king. And I also saw, I don't have those Sfarim here, but my impression was that my uncle said that there's a special halacha. You take a look, the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim. It's really called, in the original transcript, in the original writings of the Rambam. Now, when they print new Rambams, they put it in Hilchos Malachim el Milchomoseihem. The laws of the kings and their wars. The wars, and the Rambam discusses the laws regarding war, waging war on behalf of the Jewish people in Hilchos Malachim. And that's identified as the War of the Kings. Now, regard to Milchemes Amalek, it goes without saying that Melech plays a vital role. We first of all, Marin Sanhedrin mentions Xeris Akosov, Kiyad al Case Ka, Milcham Hashem Ba'amalek, Midor Dor case is symbolic of throne. And also the Ramban points out in Hilchos Malachim that Shmuel, when he told Shaul to wage war against Amalek, he told him, God sent me to anoint you as king over the Jewish people. So now go and fight Amalek. There is a connection between the appointment of Shaul as king, as Melech, and the Milchemes Amalek. But I think I saw that my uncle also said that while by Amalek there's a special din of a Melech by Milchemes Amalek, but perhaps to a lesser degree. There is a special din that there is a mitzvah to have a melech, to appoint a melech when you go to battle. And as far as that was concerned, so there was a temporary need because the Chashmonaim were waging battle against the Hellenists, the Syrian Greeks, the Hellenistic Jews. So there was a special reason to appoint a melech. So, but it was for a specific mission, for war purposes, for Beis Hamikdash purposes, and we find, my uncle pointed out that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Yalkut Shimoni says that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he told Yehoshua, Moshe Rabbeinu himself, as is pointed out by everybody, he couldn't lead the war against Amalek. He had to go on top of the mountain and raise his hands in tefillah and prayer on behalf of the Jewish people. So he entrusted Moshe Rabbeinu, had a din of a melech, of a king, but he couldn't fulfill that task, that mission of leading the Jewish people in war. And he had to give that mission over to Yehoshua. The Yalkut Shimoni says that day, when he appointed Yehoshua to go fight Amalek, he anointed him, or he appointed him, I should say. He appointed him as king, but a king with a specific task, because a war needs a king. Where it's possible, of course, to have a king. So that's why Moshe Rabbeinu gave Yehoshua that name. Now we find an interesting thing. We find that the Abraham, at the time of the Bris Milah, His name shortly, as the mitzvah bris milah is given to him, his name is changed from Avram to Avraham. First, he was an Aram, and then he becomes a father for the world, for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people, who all for the Gerim that joined the Jewish people. And Yaakov gets the name Yisrael. And what is this? Rashi explains the name Yisrael is Kisarisa im Elohim b'im Anoshim Batuchal. So you fought with the Malach and with people, and you were successful. However, Targum Onkelos says, Ki Sarisa im Elokim, you fought Hadma Elokim, before God. The im Anoshim, and with people, Batuchal, and you were successful. What is it? And he says Rav Revaya, that he says the word Yisrael, Targum Onkelos, it's that Moshe became became a sar before God. You became an officer before God. Very often, when a person is given a certain position, an aliyah legdula, so he gets a name change. And this was custom in ancient times, not just among the Jews. Yosef, when he was appointed Mishnah Lamelech in Mitzrayim, he gets the name Tzafnas Paneach. He keeps the name Yosef, but he gets a name change because he has an aliyah legdula. He assumes an important position. Yitzchak was born in Av of Klal Yisrael. He doesn't get a name change. Yaakov, according to something that Reb Chaim said, originally, one of Yitzchak's children will become the leader. But neither one was born the leader of the future generations of the Av of Klal Yisrael. Ultimately, Yaakov becomes the leader. It's not a change of identity, let's say about Avram. When he becomes a leader, it's a change of identity. He's another person. He's no longer called Avram, just Avraham. Yaakov and Yisrael, he retains the name Yaakov, but he gets the name Yisrael, which according to Targum Onkelos represents the idea of being sar, being an officer. Ki sarisa, you became an officer before God. Ki sarisa, you became an officer before God. Rav Rabbi, you became an officer before God. It represents an aliyah l'gdula. And it represents an aliyah l'gdula, getting this position of honor, of authority, whatever it is. But more than that, of being an av of future generations of Klal Yisrael. So he gets a name change, but he still retains the name Yaakov. I think that this also is the idea of Yehoshua. Yehoshua, when he's appointed to lead the Jews in war, a task that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't do because he had to be engaged in tefillah. He had to be on top of the mountain. But when the Jewish people go to war, if we can, we have to have a king. And that's what the Alkut Shimoni means, that Yehoshua was appointed as a king on that day for that task. And it was for that reason that he received the name. So here, I want to suggest something. That when Moshe was sending the Meraglim, in a sense, the war against the Shiva Amimim, the war to occupy Eretz Yisrael, that was the plan until the Meraglim came back and led the revolt. This was the beginning. This was the beginning of the battle. But Moshe Rabbeinu, for whatever reason, he couldn't leave Klal Yisrael. So in a sense, Yehoshua was being appointed, was given the position of fighting the war, at least the initial part of the war. And the Meraglim were the initial part of the war. The going out of the spies. So the war to conquer Eretz Yisrael began at that point. So the Torah tells us that Moshe called him Yehoshua. He had the name from before because he was appointed as a king for the Milchemes Amalek. And to a certain degree, he kept the name. He was still called Yehoshua. Others called him Hosea, according to one Lashon in the Ramban. But he had the name Yehoshua. But the Torah emphasizes it over here that he kept the name Vayikra because that Moshe emphasized now that you are leading the beginning of the battle to capture Eretz Yisrael. The war to capture Eretz Canaan and turn it to Eretz Yisrael is beginning right now. And you are leading that war. So the Torah emphasizes Moshe calling him Yehoshua as indicative that he is reassuming that position of being a king. A name change represents an aliyah l'gdula, of getting a higher position. And when I was thinking of this pshat, actually this morning, it dawned on me. The war began. And the Jewish people all along were looking forward. To going to Eretz Yisrael. And even afterwards, when they weren't supposed to, they recognized their mistake. And they try against the tzivur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go to Eretz Yisrael. And they're wiped out. And then when these people come back, the Meraglim come back. The Meraglim lead the people in a revolt against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against Moshe, and against Eretz Yisrael. So much so, they're ready to go back to Egypt. where there were slaves. And I was thinking, what are we facing today? The Jewish people are at war. And there are miraglim. People who talk against Klal Yisrael. The way they talk. They could have been appointed to Hitler's cabinet. As if Israel is committing genocide. Why? Because the food that is sent into Gaza, Hamas is taking it all. And they use the food to lure people, become soldiers to kill the Jewish people. And I've seen people go out of their way to suggest Israel's still at fault. Israel should send in soldiers to make sure that the people in Gaza get the food, they should risk their lives against Hamas. And when it's known and it's clear to everybody that the people of Gaza, you remember after October 7th, how they rejoiced about the Jewish children that were put in the ovens in front of their mothers, the mothers who were raped. And these people are talking, and they talk about the West Bank. Just today, there's reports how they stoned a shepherd's flock, and then they stoned the shepherd on the West Bank. Where is the protests? All these people, where are they? And Israel should risk itself because the people of Gaza who put Hamas in charge, who cheered Hamas, sometimes people lose all sense, all rational sense. And that's it. They're ready to go back to Mitzrayim, ready to go back to Egypt. They're ready to destroy themselves. We are facing the same problem today. And there are so many more miraglim. And one influences the other. And the leaders of Klal Yisrael have to understand that they have to understand that even when there are crowds, we shouldn't make the mistake. If you think you're a leader, in other words, if you are a leader has to lead and not to be led. And we find people who consider themselves leaders of the Jewish people. Just recently, I read an article that they have a meeting with the Pope, and they thank the Pope for talking against Israel about Gaza. Oh, and they also thank the Pope. It was a good thing that he said that that he also said October 7th wasn't a good thing. Yeah, that's their heter to time and time again repeat that. But see, what do they focus most on? They focus most on what they consider the atrocities of the Jewish people in trying to survive. They focus most on their position. And they make connections with Sonny Yisrael, who they offer their support. In his comments against the Jewish people, against the Jewish nation, they see themselves as avodim. They're ready to go back to Egypt. They see themselves as slaves. The Jewish people as such, they feel have to be slaves. What is it? Not that they don't think about the shibud and all that stuff. But as I mentioned time and time again, there are two approaches. One approach is to see Judaism as emanating from universalism. Torah has a positive attitude for all human beings. There is another, but the other approach is to see universalism as emanating from Judaism. The proper approach is that our universalism, our dedication has to come from our Judaism. The problem with all these people is they want their Judaism to be molded by the universalism. And when the world speaks out against the Jewish people, they feel there's a special need for the Jewish people to speak out against the Jewish people. They're avodim. They want to return to Mitzrayim. And they try to redefine what it means to be a Jew. We have to, every year, we celebrate Pesach. Every year, why? Every year, we have to make sure we're free. Sometimes, that feeling of being a slave to Mitzrayim and to the successes of Mitzrayim passes through the generations, and especially with many of these movements that try to make Judaism as something that emanates from the universalism. We have to insist that it be universalism emanating from our Judaism, is molded by our Judaism. If the universalism is motivated by our Judaism, will we really be a free people? But if we're going to have our Judaism emanating from our universalism, we're going to disconnect ourselves from reality because of that need to have the approval of the Umos Olam, of the nations. Melech, a king, a leader, has to be on guard. You have to have that personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course. But the idea is you have to have that sense of independence. You have to be able to rise above the people and not to commit the mistake that Shaul HaMelech made when he said, I heard what the people wanted. No, you have to hear what God wants.
Okay, that's done.
Yes.
Okay.